High School. With me tonight we have Chris Cardinal and Richard Monday from Richard's from Newman Architects and Chris is from Langen Engineering. And I wanted to go over our request for variance here in the city. We met on February 20th, and at that time Chris reviewed our request for the site coverage of 15%. At that time we were a little over 20%, in the 20-25% range. And so we went back to the drawing board to see if we can develop a better plan to help reduce our coverage on the site and to provide us with a site that's responsive and in a thoughtful way that responds to the requirements and regulations as well as to sustainable design. So we've made those modifications, and Chris will go through those in detail. We've taken and we've moved tennis courts from the south end of the site to the north end of the site, and we moved some of our parking to the south end of the site and made that pervious pavement to help reduce the coverage on the site. At this time, we're just over 19% in coverage. There's a lot of discussion at our last meeting about the hardship associated with this property. And Chris went into detail about our site development, our design. But in essence, we have a 35-acre property. We have the Indian River, which runs from north to south through the site. We have extensive wetland corridors, as well as an extensive floodplain, mainly on the east side of the river. So what's happened is we've located our ball fields, our baseball, softball, soccer, lacrosse, practice football, and we've located our building, mainly our parking, our drives, all on the west side of the site. And we've concentrated those to the the northern two-thirds of the site. And the reason that we've done that is to respond to the requirement to reduce our coverage. We're collecting all of the hard surfaces on this site, all the hard surfaces. That includes our building, our tennis courts, our parking where we don't have pervious pavement, and we're infiltrating that into our septic system, into our leach field. We've essentially taken all that 19% and we've infiltrated it into our design so that we can have a wastewater treatment plant. Anything that we couldn't do on the south side, we've used pervious pavement. Chris will go through a tabulation that shows that complete coverage. But we've really taken, and to the best of our ability, developed this site to be responsive to the requirements of the regulations, but also to be responsive to the site. I was thinking about why is there a 15% maximum coverage on a site? And the reason for that is that you want to reduce your runoff. That's the reason for that coverage. And so what we've done with our design is we've actually taken the site, which is currently a developed property, and we reduced the runoff from the site. Not only we reduced it, but we're infiltrating that water back into the ground to treat our wastewater. So we've taken all the necessary steps that we can to make sure that we were responsive, that our design was sustainable, and that we provided you with a plan that, to the best of our ability, without the hardship, meets the intent of the regulations. So I'd like to turn it over to Chris, and he can go through the calculations and exactly what's pervious, what's impervious, and how we've laid out the site. Thank you.
For the record, I'm Chris Cardinal, professional engineer with Langen Engineering. We're the site engineers on this. And I'd like to put up C1.00, last revised March 15th. This was the plan that was just submitted. Joe described some of the changes. This shows it illustratively in a different way. If you remember, the tennis courts were here. We swapped them here. And any parking that we displaced, we put back here and made pervious pavement. We've also added pervious pavement here. We've added pervious pavement to the driveway and parking across the way. We've reduced the amount of walks, and if any of the walks that are remaining are required for accessibility and access to bleachers and things like that. But these are going to be pervious as well. So they're all color-coded that way. So we've increased the pervious coverage, and we've provided a breakdown of the coverage. So the building is still 1.9. It's actually decreased slightly. The pavement walks, courtyard, play area, field equipment, which is any slabs for bleachers and that kind of stuff. We're now down to 3.9 acres. And our our original plan, if you remember where we left off in comparison, this is C.100 dated 2/15, so a month ago. The only pervious pavement we had was in this location. The tennis courts were here. All these were impervious walks, impervious parking, and drive aisles. So we've reduced that impervious coverage from 5.7 acres, which was previously submitted, down to 3.9. So that's a 30% reduction. And so with that, the coverage has gone down to 19.3%. So we've provided that breakdown. The other thing on this side of the site, we've reduced the amount of sidewalks. And so that's how we got to 19.3%. And I'll cover in a minute, as Joe said, the infiltration piece of that. Again, to expand on what Joe said about the hardship, all these lines are part of the survey, but we're just sort of bringing them to the surface so they're clear to see. As Joe mentioned, we have a river that runs through it, and the river, this is just a depression, this isn't part of the river, but it's, at the time of the survey, it was holding water. With that, we have wetlands on either side, that's shown by this green line, juts out here. We have the wetland setback that straddles each side. And then we have a series of floodplains. We have a 100-year floodplain, we have a 500-year floodplain, we have a map, those are mapped floodplain lines, and then we have a floodplain based on the elevation that was done as part of the FEMA study. And that's shown in red. And as Joe said, that's primarily limited to the eastern side of the site. So our program is on this side, and these constraints are the hardship. If the river wasn't there, or if it was in a different location, or if we had more developable area to work with, that would work in our favor in terms of the septic design and the nitrogen dilution. But we don't have that. We have a hardship in the fact that these constraints bisect the site. In terms of the impacts that Joe mentioned, this is an air photo of the site. The proposed site is underneath in yellow. It's a little bit hard to see, but you can see that today you have the nurseries. And around the nurseries and through each one of these rows you have, if you've been to the site, it's really dirt roads, compacted gravel. The site's been used in this way for over 30 years. And it was noted last night, we read into the meeting, the minutes from the sidewalks, and at one of the sidewalks there was some rain, and it was clearly just running off. It acts as pavement in this condition. So although it's not counted for in the coverage calcs, because coverage, gravel and compacted dirt and such don't count against the coverage count. But we're converting all that hardscape to grass fields. And in terms of coverage and infiltration, if I could go back to the proposed plan, with this being impervious surface, if it was pervious surface, we would be infiltrating at this location. What we're doing is we're collecting it here, and we're infiltrating it here. We're still infiltrating. The infiltration basin is integral to the design. We're not proposing one without the other. So, in fact, we are infiltrating and negating the facts of the increase in coverage. As Joe said, we're reducing runoff from the site for all storms, including a 100-year storm. We're reducing those flows by 9%. So, so with that, we'll entertain any questions that you may have.
I have a question this time. James, any question? Cheryl? Questions? Bill?
Have you had an approved septic system design for that yet?
We're in process. It's not approved yet.
Okay, because most of the time when we get applications here, they come with a letter from the regulating body stating that a septic system has been approved for the applicant on the property.
Yeah, we have a letter from the local health district saying it's a DEP
They're not the
system.
regulating body on that.
And we have meeting minutes from the DEP that illustrate that.
We haven't seen any correspondence from the DEP, that's why I'm asking the question.
Even so, it's not an approved system yet.
So there could be more impervious material or buildings or structures on the property if it was required to comply with a septic system.
We've set the limit and we'll design to that limit.
So you don't, at this point, you don't know what kind of system you're putting in?
We do.
Because before, last meeting, you said you didn't know if it was gonna be one way or the other way.
We know.
We actually met with DEP, Chris and I were both there, and they outlined their proposed wastewater treatment facility. And it is a recognized design system, and we will go through the process to make sure that we're meeting all the requirements of the DEP. But they do not express any concerns whatsoever with the design as it's been presented at this time.
I think we should have some correspondence from them as part of your application.
We will be required to have approval from DEP for this septic system, no doubt.
And it could be conditioned, you know, that we will have an approval from DEP.
Eileen, any questions, anything else?
Is there a defined stormwater storage plan for the project?
It is, and as part of the wetlands application, we've been submitting that.
Okay. You initially started, it's my understanding, with a ground coverage of about 30%. You've reduced that down to 25% at the last meeting, and now the proposal is 19.3%. Is that not true?
Yep.
All set, Bill?
I thought I read something there, you were gonna put storage tanks in for your runoff water?
There's treatment tanks that'll treat the stormwater.
For your runoff parking lots and stuff, did I read something about that?
There's a vortex unit, which will help take the sediments out as well as beach sumps.
I don't think we submitted that as part of this CBA, but the wetlands application does have the storage tanks in it. They're not storage tanks, they're treatment tanks.
Those are below ground?
Yes.
Anything else?
No.
I think you made it a lot clearer this time. Thank you. Any correspondence, Cheryl?
Two lists and one letter.
Okay.
This is a list of documents received through February 19, 2013. Documents from this list will be read into the record upon request. Documents received after this time will be read into the record. All documents on file in the land use office. Date, February 15, 2013, letter to Kraus. The summary, February 14, 2013, staff review, 6 comments. Date, February 19, 2013, letter from Thomas. Summary, town's engineer review, 4 recommendations. Would anyone like any of these documents to be read into the record? This is another list of documents. This is the list of documents received February 20th, 2013 to March 19th, 2013. Documents from this list will be read into the record upon request. Documents received after this time will be read into the records. All documents are on file in the land use office. Date, February 19th, 2013. Document, letter from Jacobson. Summary, town's engineer review, 4 comments. Date, February 19th, 2013, document memo from Martinson. Summary, sanitary septic system will need state DEP approval. Date, February 20th, 2013, document, letter from Budum. Summary, no planning and zoning decisions have been made on this property. Date, February 20th, 2013. Document, letter to Kraus. Summary, February 19th, 2013, staff meeting, 6 comments. Date, March 5th, 2013. Document, memo from Martinson. Summary, sanitary septic system will need state DEP approval. Would anyone wish to have a document from the document list read into the record? Okay. Town of Clinton, 54 East Main Street, Clinton, Land Use Office, March 20th, 2013. This is from Mr. J. Kraus, Program Management Group, 42 Rockaway Road, Woodstock, Connecticut, regarding ZBA 13004, the new Morgan School, 71, 69, 69A, Killingworth Turnpike, Town of Clinton. Dear Mr. Kraus, at the March 20th, 2013 application review meeting, Zoning Enforcement Officer Thomas W. Lane reviewed the documents submitted on this application through March 15th, 2013. New comments are in bold in italics. On the application for certificate of variance, 1, this comment stands. As to number 15, the hardship, the applicant should be prepared to demonstrate a hardship connected with the land that warrants the granting of the variance. On the site plan, revision dated February 15th, 2013. 1, this comment has been addressed. On compliance with Clinton zoning regulations, section 4, procedures, 1, this comment has been addressed. 2, this comment has been addressed. 3, this comment stands. As to section 4.34, digital data, the final site plan should be submitted in electronic form. On the ground coverage calculation sheet, this comment has been addressed. General comments. The applicant should be prepared to demonstrate the need for the ground coverage proposed. Consideration should be given to low-impact development such as permeable surfacing for walks and parking. The applicant has addressed this comment by decreasing the impervious surface and increasing the pervious surface by eliminating walkways and pathways and revising the northern parking lot areas to be pervious pavement. Impervious pavement will be recharging the groundwater by means of stormwater infiltration basin within the same water wash. Do not hesitate to contact me if you have any questions. The technical inquiries can be directed to Zoning Enforcement Officer Lane. Sincerely, Shirley Lee Hines, Land Use Technician.
Thank you. What's that? I'm not sure. Was this final site plan submitted in electronic form?
Just to clarify, the plan that was submitted March 15th, this plan tonight has been submitted electronically. I think that's in reference to whatever the approved plan would be. So we're current on that.
Thank you. Would anyone in the audience care to speak in favor of this application?
First Selectman Willie Prince. After the last meeting with the zoning board of appeals and public hearing, the building committee, members of the building committee worked with the architect's engineer, our owner's rep, and addressed the concerns that we heard from ZBA and the concerns from the zoning enforcement officer regarding the ground coverage. Also, there were some concerns from the Public Works Director as well. I think they made a good effort to reduce the ground coverage to a reasonable level based on the zone, and I hope the Commission would see fit to approve this application.
Thank you. Would anyone else care to speak in favor of this application? Would anyone like to speak in opposition to this application? Yes, sir.
Vince Amino, 161 East Main Street. The applicant has not established a legal hardship. The hardship that they're speaking of is self-inflicted. What they're not telling you is that they've already designed another school building. That school building would have had less ground coverage. They've decided instead that they want to build this. This is their own decision. It's self-inflicted. And the reason why they want to build, they're not building a first building is they claim that it's too expensive to build. That would be economic. And they're not allowed to claim an economic hardship. And as I said, they're not allowed to claim a self-inflicted hardship. I'd also like to mention that this application hasn't even been to planning and zoning yet. So what denial are they appealing? Why are they appealing? Why are they backdooring it and going first to ZBA instead of going to planning and zoning, seeing if the plan itself is approved, and then if there's a denial because of the ground coverage, then they come to this body. But again, they haven't established their hardship. And if they're even 1% over, they're not in compliance. As we know, they're at 19.3. They need to go back to the drawing board. And the only other condition would be, if not granting this, would render the property to have no value. And that certainly isn't the case. So you can't claim that either. Also, if you grant this, and if for whatever reason, I mean, we have to realize that they're in the infancy of this project. They haven't even shown you a septic plan yet. So what if they don't build it and you grant this? Now it goes with the property. And if someone else obtains the property, well, now they've got the variance. And it certainly was never what was intended. So they haven't established a hardship, and their only hardships are self-inflicted and economic. The property would have value without this variance, and you really can't allow this variance to go to a piece of property which is then transferable. Thank you.
You're welcome. Would you care to respond?
Specific to the application, it doesn't go with the property.
That's something for, responding.
Your name is Mr.
Joe Kraus, project manager for the Morgan Variance. My response, the first point that he makes is that we're going out of order, that we're going to ZBA before we go to planning and zoning. And I hold, and perhaps Sherry can correct us if we're wrong, but we are actually going in the proper direction. We should get the variance approved before we go to planning and zoning, correct? With regard to the hardship, I believe that we have demonstrated the hardship based on the characteristics of the property and the development which is allowed in this zone. And we're allowed to have a school with its associated parking, paving areas. And we have taken great steps to provide a sustainable design which really matches the land and improves the land from an impervious surface area. So I think that we have clearly demonstrated how we've arrived where we are at our impervious surface, as well as demonstrating how this land that was procured for the school causes us to require a slight increase in impervious surface.
And then there's Chris Cardney from Langdon. For the record, there's two other points I'd like to clarify. There was reference to another application. There's no other septic design that's out there. This is the design. We developed it. And the septic plan has been submitted to the town as part of the Inland Wetlands Commission application, so it's on record. It shows the galleries, it shows whatever you need to see in terms of septic.
Thank you. Anyone else care to speak in opposition to this variance? Yes, sir.
My name is Anthony Pinto. I reside at 17 Loop Road. I speak against this simply because these gentlemen are engineers, architects, all kinds of people have been on this project for a good amount of time. And usually, when you reach this point in a project, you should have analyzed and encompassed what problems are going to come up with this property. That water course, the wetlands, and whatever issues are not as of last night. They've been there for 40 or 50 years or 100, probably since the beginning of time. I don't know or care. But I would assume that these people in this town would have enough to do their due diligence long before we reach this point to ask for an exception to this property. I honestly believe this property has been treated in such a way that here we are still trying to figure out what we're going to put, how much are we spending, and what are we doing. And my next question would be, if this variance is not granted, what, if any, additional cost or no additional cost will be acclimated or put against this project? I think that's very important because it is self-inflicted. They know about it, and it's now here before them, and they want you and us to absorb this problem. At what cost? Maybe he can answer, if you don't get this variance, what's the additional cost to the project? I think it's important to figure out what is that cost, if any. If there isn't, there isn't. But at least we'll know there is no cost attributed to this variance. Either way. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan, care to respond?
I think it was mentioned either tonight or the other hearing that financial is part of the reason for the variance. So that's not why we're here, is to save money or to do a lesser design.
I think it is important to recognize, Joe Kraus, that we are looking at this property, and certainly the conditions that exist out there have been there since we and we know fully what we're doing. We've completed our geotechnical analysis, we've done our wetland survey, so we understand the property. But I think for this board, it's important to really look at what the coverage means. Okay, it's a 15% coverage, which is stipulated within the regulations. We're requesting a variance to increase that by 4.3%. But that coverage was put in place within the regulations. What's the intent of that coverage? The intent is that you don't want to increase the runoff from your site. You don't want to go out and pave your R20 zone and have it completely run off the property. So they've set that limit. But what we've done is we've said, okay, we understand the intent of that regulation, and we're going to make our project, we're going to design our project in such a way that we are sustainable, that we're not impacting our surroundings, that we're actually recharging that groundwater back in, that stormwater back into the groundwater through our infiltration basin. So while we don't meet that number, the 19.1 versus 15, we have exceeded the intent of the regulations by collecting all of that stormwater, essentially all of it on the site. Anything even to the south, that's permeable pavement. We're recharging that back in the groundwater. So we've actually gone above and beyond, I think, with this design to make it a better situation.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to submit,
Your name again?
Vince Amino, 161 East Main, and I'd like to submit that, first of all, it's completely improper for the engineer or the architect to be telling you why the regulation was created and why it was restricted to 15%. I will tell you that there are a lot of reasons why it's restricted to 15%, and just as if on any other parcel, I wanted to build, for example, a home that exceeded the limit. The reason why you don't is because it has been felt that there's an appropriate size of building and there's an appropriate amount of ground that should be covered that is that is, that's in the character of the area, or whatever the case may be, but it's totally improper for the architect and the engineer to be telling you why the regulation was written the way it was. Secondly, I did not hear any response to the fact that there had been a previous building design, and they have now chosen to build this one instead. If they built the first building, would they still need a variance? Or would it minimize the amount of ground coverage? Would it make it less ground coverage? And if that's the case, then it's certainly self-inflicted. And is it true that a consideration in building this building instead of the first one is cost? It is. The other building's too expensive to build. That makes this an economic, self-inflicted hardship, if you want to call it a hardship. But it's not a hardship. It's a choice. And just like you made this man abide by the regulations of the town can't now go and violate its own regulations. It's just not right. Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Richard Monday, Newman Architects. There was an expression of an opinion about the cost of the what we consider the referendum design concept and this concept. The design of this building is not based on a consideration of whether it is or is not more expensive than the conceptual design. The design of this building is predicated on considerations of function and the program as it was developed in the months subsequent to the referendum. So they're two different designs, but the differences between the two have no connection to a belief that the original design, the referendum design, would be too expensive. That was not what drove the design change.
I think he was asking also that if you had an initial design plan, would you need a variance?
Any differences that may exist between the footprint of that conceptual design, which was never proved out in subsequent design analysis, and this footprint would not alter the variance that is being sought.
And again, to restate that, Chris, pardon me, to restate that conceptual design that Richard just mentioned, did not have grading plans, utility plans, septic design plans. It was a concept to set the program. So, right.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, but the question wasn't answered. The question is, what was the footprint of the original building, and what's the footprint of this building?
That was asked.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The question is, they had a first building that had a certain design, a particular design. Now they have a second building which has a different design, which has a greater footprint, which occupies more space. Now you can say, are you going to require less parking with this building than you would with the other? Why? Does that make any sense to anyone? So the parking area would essentially be the same. Everything else would be the same, but the first building is a smaller footprint, and thereby it would minimize what you're claiming is a hardship. You're choosing to build this building. Okay, if I can build a house on my property that's a certain size and it would fit within the regulations, well, I can't then say, but I'd rather build a bigger one. You wouldn't allow that. You ask that man if the size of his shed is the same. Why? Because you have regulations.
I thought you answered that question. Would you care to respond?
Yes. The
Your
conception,
name again?
Richard Monday, Newman Architects. The original design concept which was presented for the referendum was not designed with the information that we developed subsequent to the referendum. There's very many complexities in the program that were not addressed in what was a very initial design sketch that described internal functions. It didn't describe many of the relationships that are always developed in the context of the actual site. That design was actually developed without site, and so it didn't have the benefit of that information.
If that concept plan was the one that would be submitted, would you still need a variance?
I believe so, yes.
Any other people want to speak in opposition to this? No? No sit here? Motion closed. Entertain a motion to close this public hearing, ZBA 13004. So moved by Bill, second. Eileen, all in favor? Opposed? None. Thank you. Okay, this is ZBA 13004, 71 Kellingworth Turnpike. They're seeking a maximum aggregate ground coverage variance for the construction of a new school. The main issue with this project that it needs stormwater dilution to lower nitrogen levels for on-site sewage disposal. And this is provided by stormwater runoff from impervious areas such as the building itself, parking areas, sidewalks, tennis courts, among other things. They're seeking a 19.3% ground coverage, which is about 4.3% over the allowable. They did make efforts from the previous meeting to reduce the ground coverage. The paved areas are 3.9 acres, the tennis court 1 acre, and the building 1.9 acres. They moved the tennis courts, one tennis court, I guess, and some parking to reduce the sidewalks and parking areas. And they stated that they're reducing the runoff of the property as it now exists. And it's not impacting the surroundings.
I think the hardship.
Well, I'm going to get into that also, but they're stated property. Keep in mind, this is the property, the variance stands alone, and hardship has to do with the uniqueness of this property. And in this case, it's the wetlands, it's the Indian River that bisects it east and west. There's a 100-year and a 500-year floodplain, and just the natural features of this property, it poses constraints on it. They did make an effort to lower it, and the hardship, I think, is, in my mind, okay. And that's about it in a nutshell. More of a rigmarole. Anyone have any questions or comments? Jim?
I have a comment. I think it should be noted that if this property was to be subdivided into R20 lots, the 15% coverage would apply to each one of the lots. However, the road that would be required to subdivide those lots would be largely paved, and then the net impervious area for the overall property would be higher than the minimum 15%. So in my opinion, I agree that they've made strides to reduce the area of impervious, and also I believe that this variance would be consistent with the municipal coastal plan, which specifically talks about water quality in the Indian River. So I think it's consistent with our plan of conservation and development and our municipal coastal plan.
I'd still like to see a plan for the septic system for the improvement.
Apparently there is one on file.
Should we have that? No, we do for every other property.
We do, but
Well, we could make a contingency, contingent upon the educational facility itself being built and the septic being accepted.
well, that's a given. Can't build without one.
Right. Well, if we grant the variance as stated will stay with the property.
Unless we have a condition that is with the
Exactly.
school only,
Yes.
with the school, this proposed school only. Well, I see your point, yeah. Cheryl, you have any comments or questions?
Is that something that we can condition?
Yes.
That's for you, Tom, that we can put that in?
You can condition it for the use, you know, school, the septic system is a third party, you can't do that.
Okay.
We can condition it
That's
that,
based on somebody else's approval.
we can condition it that this variance is for this school only.
Mhm. Well, it
This
has
project,
to,
this proposed school.
has to go through the,
Right, that's
it
what
has
we
to
can-
go through them anyway, though.
We can't dictate the sub.
Right. It has to.
Should I go through that first?
Not necessarily.
No. I don't think the order is.
Well, when you're building a house, the first thing you gotta do is show that you can put a code compliant septic system on the lot.
Apparently they did.
You don't have proof that has been done.
You feel that there's a problem with that? You feel
I don't
that?
know, I'm not an engineer, but they're not showing us that they have an approved system, the DEP.
But
They're
the
the government,
project,
they're the authority, they're the
project
regulators.
will not be built if it's not acceptable. That's a given. So it's really not an issue, because it's a given.
So I know what
We're
you're saying.
protected. I understand you want to make sure that it's done right, and
That's
it
exactly.
will be done right, because it has,
Yeah, we have no control over this.
right.
We'd like to see it, so we have no control over it. It's someone else's purview.
It's not within our realm.
No. But they should still show us that they can do it.
Well, I think that in order for this whole project to move forward,
Why do we
It's
have
going to have
everybody
to.
else show us approved septic systems and plans for when we grant variances for houses and everything else? We have the governing authority, the regulators show us in writing that they approve what's going on with the system at the house.
Tom, that's not a requirement, that was in our apps.
It's a requirement they show their system, you know, they have to refer, you know, requirements refer to the health district. You know, that's the only requirement we have.
So it's referred to the health.
It's referred to.
This has been
This is a
referred.
greater regulator, this is the DEP.
Yeah, that's what it's referred to.
Right.
But their permitting process is separate from ours. And they grant their approvals just like the health district does. If they don't grant it, you know, they have to come, you know, revise their plans. If they change something that, you know, that we granted in the past, they'd have to come back. You know, to you, you know, if they have to build another building or something, make some more ground coverage, they'd have to come back. Or they'd have to put it back in the confines of what was granted.
Okay, good. Satisfied with that to some degree?
Sure.
Jen?
Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't the distinction the fact that we are not approving a site plan at this stage?
You're only approving one
Very
small.
Ground coverage.
Ground coverage there.
That's my point.
Right.
That's my point, that if it was a site plan approval and it was going through zoning, then a site plan would be appropriate. If it was a CAM application, then it would also be appropriate, because we'd be looking at the site plan also, which we're not for this application, so I think that's the distinction.
That's what people into this huge project is only concerned with one element of one variance, and that's relatively minimum ground coverage issue. That's the only variance they're looking for. Any other questions? Someone want to make a motion? I would suggest that if there are motions made to grant that we put a condition in that this variance goes with this proposed school only. I can make the motion.
You have that motion?
That grant the variance for 19.3% ground coverage, maximum ground coverage with an increase of about 4.3%. And the hardship.
The hardship of this property is the Indian River running through it, along with the floodplains and wetlands. The location of the river limits the use of the central part of the property. In order to protect this river, a certain amount of impervious materials must be used on the property in order to collect water to promote the volume of drainage as required by the state to meet its standards for nitrogen dilution before treated waters reach this river. The initial variance request of 30% ground coverage was reduced to 25% and now to 19.3. A concerted effort to reach the area's zoning regulation of 15% has been accomplished for this educational facility.
Okay, that's the, and if you want to add an addendum for a condition for that this
It's contingent upon the educational facility being built.
being proposed.
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion to grant this variance, 13004, hardship shown, and a condition. Any other comments? All in favor of the motion, say aye.
I second it.
I second, I'm sorry.
Who made the motion?
James.
Eileen second.
James,
Yeah.
with the content that I need to.
Yes. And a condition. Eileen seconded.
It's the second and I need a second.
Okay.
Discussion.
Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of granting the variance, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I am.
So,
Okay, I need a comment, who's in favor?
Mr. Staunton, Mr. Falconer,
No, he's not.
No,
Mr. Staunton? Yes.
and Cheryl?
Cheryl?
Cheryl? Eileen?
Yes.
And George.
Opposed, Walter?
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, next application is 13-0.